It is a really interesting passage if you have the chance to really dig into it. And I just want to spend a few minutes this morning thinking about some of the ways in which a passage, even one that to look at the surface of it may not feel like, oh goody, we get to hear that one, nevertheless has important things for us to think about and to mull over as we continue our faith journey individually and separately. The letter to the Galatians has been called the Magna Carta of the church. And that may sound a little hard to believe given that little piece of it that you've just heard. But the Apostle Paul really is trying to speak to a church that he founded, and as was his custom, he would go to a community, live there for a while, gather people into a church, kind of get them going, and then move on to the next thing. Management consultants understand Paul immediately. And there is that quality that his work so often has of gathering people, getting things running, and then doing troubleshooting later on as he has gone on to another place. And that's what the letters of Paul actually are. They are the documents that have survived by churches that were doing just fine, and then everything starts to run off the rails, and they write Paul saying, "Help." And so Paul responds. And the churches in Galatia were in a particular situation which is a little bit hard for us to imagine today, because Paul established them, they were running well, off he moved to his next stop as we just talked about, and then other people arrived claiming to have spiritual authority to tell them that what they were doing incorrectly. And so this letter is Paul's attempt to say, yeah, don't listen. The problem was that it wasn't as simple as, I founded you, I know what's right, so listen to me. The problem was that the people who came to tell the Galatians that they were supposed to be doing things differently were people who actually had more impressive resumes than Paul did. And so Paul is suddenly in this position not only of trying to set them straight, but also to argue for his own authority in telling them anything at all. And you may have heard some of that tension in that passage that we read this morning. There is this quality Paul has of giving his resume to this group of people who know him well. My best friend visited town. He came into town kind of unexpectedly this week. It was a lot of fun to see him and to spend some time with him. And we were reminiscing at one point this week about that moment in kind of the end of junior, beginning of senior year, when you realize that college is not going to last forever and that you're going to have to get a job at the end of all this. It's a sort of horrible day, right, when that really first comes to you. And one of the things that we were talking about, which we remembered strangely well, was actually writing our first resumes. Do you remember writing your first resume? You have no experience at all. You're like, I managed to graduate high school. I think, all things being equal, I'm probably going to graduate college. That's why I'd like to work for Anderson Consulting. You know, it's a daunting prospect, writing those resumes. And I remember some of the things that we used to say. We had a friend who wrote on his resume, reads the Washington Post and New York Times every day. And, you know, being kind as the way we were like, what does that actually prove? That you can read what? He also, and this he's never gotten over, he also put Nietzsche scholar on his resume. And what's ironic is that he went on to get a doctorate, and it's in comparative literature, German, French, and English, and therefore he sort of is a Nietzsche scholar now. But the idea that you would claim these sort of badges of identity seemed so important in those early resumes. The idea that you already knew how to do things, Seemed like what those were about. And of course, looking back, we realized we didn't know how to do a darn thing. But they didn't expect us to. They knew what that was. And so there is this quality that we have, even in our culture, I think, of wanting to show what we know and wanting to show the basis of the authority that we offer to whatever it is that we're asked to be a part of. And Paul's impulse to give his resume, in some sense, comes out of that. You've also maybe heard, how many of you have heard of the idea of a drop-dead press conference? Anybody? All right, a drop-dead press conference is, if something goes catastrophically wrong with your organization, they say, come out early, tell them everything, disclose everything, and stay at the press conference until nobody has any more questions whatsoever. And then, Matt's nodding, yes. Then the idea that you have been fully transparent will be a case that you can make. Paul is a little bit coming out early and often in terms of his own credentials. The authority that he's offering them, he says, is coming from a different kind of place than the authority that the people who are coming from Jerusalem are able to offer. He says, no. In fact, I did persecute the church. I admit it. I didn't then go immediately when the scales fell from my eyes on the road to Damascus and I realized that was wrong. I didn't then go and apprentice myself to the apostles. I didn't do that. I did something different. I went into seclusion. I went into the furthest thing from the church for 3 years. When I met the apostles, I met them for 2 weeks. And that's where the point is. It isn't that he went and got the experience that he needed. The experience that he needed came from a wholly other place. And that, in a funny way, is the message of this gospel and the message to the churches. It's that experience in spiritual things doesn't come through some sort of set of channels. It comes from a direct experience of God on your heart. It comes in a moment of personal and direct encounter with the Spirit. And that's its own authority. The church over the years has made a distinction between the church visible, which is the institution of church, and the church invisible, which are the people called by God, who understand themselves as loved by God, as helped by God, as created by God, and as created by God to serve creation, and in creation to serve God. That church invisible is a gathered group, and nobody knows exactly who is in it except God. And what Paul is saying is, for all the importance of creating structures, for all the importance of building buildings, doing things, what fundamentally matters is that we are a group of people who feel our lives have been touched by the holy. We are people who understand themselves, however dimly, to be loved by God. And we understand that as we try our best to do what's right, we understand that God is the audience and that God cheers us on. That's what he's saying. He's saying that is what the church really is. It's the people who try as best they can with all the challenges that we all have, with the sense that just our trying already pleases God. And I wish I had known that in those days when I was writing my resume. I wanted to be so very impressive. It's interesting, I remember what everyone else wrote on their resume. I have repressed what I wrote on mine. But I think that pull, that sense of wanting to prove myself, was really animating me. And I think what this gospel says is, as much as we want to prove ourselves, the thing that actually makes a difference is knowing that we're loved and being urgent in our desire to act on behalf of, in the name of, and in the spirit of that love. Who we already are is the basis for who it is we will become. And you don't need to sugarcoat it. You just need to be it. And that's the message. It would be easier, maybe, to just say, I'm a Nietzsche scholar. The invitation is an invitation to simply be who we are, knowing that God decided that was a good enough place to begin. Thanks be to God.